Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Avalara for Acumatica webinar. My name is Marika Deemer, a marketing coordinator here at Action Associates. Now let me introduce you to our presenters today, Maria Tringali and Chad Tenery. I'll let them tell a little bit more about themselves, and then they can get to the content. So go ahead and take it over, guys.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're delighted to be here. My name is Maria Tringali, and this is our disclaimer first. We hope you'll find this discussion helpful. So my name is Maria Tringali, and I'm a senior solutions consultant here. I've been with Avalara about 10 years, and I work full-time with businesses that may not have a lot of retail tax, but have to worry about exemption certificates, either purchasing tax exempt or selling to buyers that want to be tax exempt. So delighted to talk to you a little bit about how we might get your business a little more compliant, and we're going to show you a demo of how Avalara software works as well, so you get some insights into what automation might look like. Chad?
Yes, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chad Tenery. Been here at Avalara for about a year and a half, and specifically work with Acumatica clients, so Acumatica customers who are either looking at Acumatica, have maybe been using Acumatica for some time and want to automate some of the manual processes from a tax compliance perspective, but then also clients who are using Acumatica who are going live and want to go live at the same time. So I've been in software for roughly a little over 10 plus years, and been looking forward to today for sure. Thanks for attending.
Wonderful. So what we have planned today is an overview of the compliance landscape for businesses that have buyers that want to be tax exempt. Some 4 common challenges that we see for folks in this business, and we're going to go through some best practices for getting and staying compliant. And as I mentioned, we're also going to give you an insight into Avalara's software so you can start to think about what that might look like in your business. So let's get right to it. So the tax exempt landscape. So understanding tax exempt sales seems fairly easy on the surface. However, it's more complex really than one might think. So for a tax exempt sale, you have to have a corresponding image, not just a tax ID number. You have to have an image of a document from the customer that wants to be tax exempt that is specific to the reason why they want to be exempt, and it is completely filled out. You can't just collect a tax ID number. You can't just take people's word for it. I talk with people all the time who do that. And it's the state's requirements require that you have an actual completed and signed document on file. We do take a lot of shortcuts, but that's what the laws say. So and there's a couple of ways that businesses might want to be tax exempt. So it may be the buyer's status as a business. It might be a charity or a healthcare organization or an educational organization or any type of government organization. So the business itself might have a tax exempt status for some or all products that they purchase. Or the more common reason is the intent of how those goods will be sold. So is it merchandise that will be resold to other businesses? Or a very common one is it might be components that are used in manufacturing. So we're going to buy those components, we're going to put them into some sort of product or service, and we're going to sell it to the next person, and then that person's most likely going to sell it to the end user. So we're sort of passing that tax along. So those are 2 different reasons. And this is, I should just state as I turn this over to Chad, this is not to be confused with products that are tax exempt. That is different. That says states actually make rules and laws about how they want products and services to be taxed. Those are things we often vote on. I live in Washington. There's a lot of things that we vote on different taxes on because we don't have a state income tax. So we're well aware of product taxability of items. But what we're talking about today are the actual documents that you collect from your customers that prove why they can be tax exempt on an order, therefore you don't have to charge them. So with that, Chad, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what resale looks like?
So really what resale looks like, and this is a perfect example from an auto supply chain perspective. So in this scenario, the seller, in this scenario, they need to collect exemption certificates from their tax exempt customers. And then a buyer in that scenario, they will need to make sure all the suppliers have their tax exempt. So it's going back and forth, both sending and receiving tax exempt forms. So as you can see there, from a components manufacturer, the buyer's buying parts, the car manufacturer to the car dealership, and then at the end of the day, the end buyer, consumer of that business. So tax exempt forms and reseller forms need to be collected to ensure you're compliant. Now, what are the 4 common compliant challenges for tax exempt sellers? And this is a lot of times what I see. First is nexus. A lot of clients I work with, they're, a lot of times unfamiliar with all the laws and what states do, what states have tax exempt forms that contribute to nexus. A lot of times, a lot of my clients think, these are not taxable sales. It's not actually accumulating and will trigger economic nexus, but it actually, in a majority of the states, I think all except maybe 6, actually tax exempt sales do trigger economic nexus. Okay, and not just taxable sales. And in the beginning, basically, and where economic nexus came from, typically to trigger, to have nexus, it was all about location, right? You have an office building, you may have a salesperson, you may have a remote employee, you may even go to a trade show, things like that. That's how nexus used to be. That's how nexus used to be triggered. Well, now, or making sure you're obligated to pay, to register and to remit back in those states. Back in 2018, there was a Wayfair versus South Dakota Act, which basically South Dakota went to Wayfair and said, hey, you have all of these. You have all my residents are all buying products from you, but we're getting no tax revenue. So when South Dakota won that case, what it did was it triggered economic nexus, is what they call it, economic nexus across the country, meaning that companies didn't have to have a physical location anymore to trigger nexus. Basically, if they sold 2 components of that, if they sold a certain number of transactions, in a majority of the states, it's 100. There's other states that's actually 200 transactions, or they sold over $100,000 worth of product. As you can see here from the map, every state's different. So, for example, Texas, if you sell over $500,000, both tax exempt or taxable sales, you would at that point have triggered economic nexus, and to be compliant, you would need to register. And then there's other states like, Nebraska or Wyoming, where all you had to do at that point is sell over $100,000 worth of revenue or worth of product or services, or have over 200 transactions. So that's why it's so important to do different types of to really monitor where you're really where you're selling, and also take into consideration tax exempt sales go into triggering economic nexus as well. As you can see here, this is another map also that really talks through this. And again, you'll have a copy of this, I believe, following the webinar as well. So you can see, take a look and see what states you possibly are selling into, and may not even be aware that you have triggered nexus. This is a really good map that shows what the laws are.
Okay. Yeah, back to that one for me, Chad. So what this slide shows is all the states that Chad mentioned, all but 6 states include exempt sales in their economic nexus thresholds. So the first slide was the economic nexus thresholds in general, but if you have exempt sales, this shows you that most states do include exempt sales in that total threshold. So a lot of people presume that just because I'm not charging tax, it doesn't count towards that threshold. Well, in 36 of the 42 states, it actually does. And so this map is just kind of demonstrating that even if you have a lot of exempt sales in your business, you may have an obligation to go ahead and register for sales and use tax reporting in each state. Thankfully, if you're not remitting a lot of money into the state, we're hopeful that the state will give you a low filing frequency. Often they start with quarterly, but if you really don't owe them a lot of money, they don't want to do any more paperwork than you do, you quite often can call them and ask that to be reduced to even an annual filing if you don't owe them a lot of money. So it's kind of an important slide to consider in your business if you have a lot of tax exempt sales.
And this is an example of the, like I was saying, between the South Dakota and Wayfair Act, where this is an example of a manufacturer in New York. 99% of their sales are to other OEMs or even through resellers as well. And what that did, the Wayfair really increased their burden to prove, to provide exempt sales. So the previous exemption certificate was less than 75 on file. The national wholesaler sells to resellers who sell to the end users, may even drop ship part of that model. Wayfair grew Nexus from their physical headquarters in New York to most, the majority where they're selling across the U.S. And now previously they had a count in the new docs they needed were about 5,000 plus as they continue to monitor, and after the Wayfair Act, that just changed the game for everybody, and everybody kind of was, scrambling, who were aware of that, the impact of that ruling. Then really the burden of proof is really on you, because if your products or goods are being resold, you do have to collect, you have to have valid and non-expired tax exempt forms. Tax exempt forms are low-hanging fruit for auditors. It's very easy for them. That's one of the first things they will look for, different transactions and things like that. So it's really up to you to ensure that you do have valid, non-expired tax exempt forms for multiple reasons, that being one of them, because there are a lot of fines and penalties that can come along with not being compliant from having all your tax exempt forms collected. You also, go ahead, Maria.
I was just going to add to that. Sorry, Chad. I was going to add to that a lot of businesses that I talk to think that, well, the customer wants to be tax exempt, so I'll just accept whatever they give me. They should know what to provide. But the customer isn't the one that's going to be audited. The burden of proof is really on the seller. And just a little history on that. In the United States, the government said that way back in the 1930s, that individual people were not voluntarily remitting sales tax. So we made the rule that the seller, the businesses, are responsible for collecting the tax from the buyer and giving it to the government. So the responsibility does fall on you, the seller. But we don't want to have any liability coming out of our pockets. We want to make sure we do it right, because I'm going to sell something to Chad. I'm going to collect the tax and put it in a bank account, and then I'm going to remit that money to the government. So it's not money out of your pocket. You are merely the transfer of that money from the buyer to the government. So the proof of when someone is tax exempt does fall on you, the seller. So let's transition over to the customer experience. So this is something that I'm super passionate about here, because it's really important that we make purchasing from us, if they want to be tax exempt, easy. And I'm going to tell you a story that's not in our slides, but I have a colleague here at Avalara who has a business, and he just set up a second business license, and he went into one of the vendors that he buys from, and he tried to set himself up as a tax exempt buyer, and all the hoops they made him go through, and how many phone calls and attempts to submit his exemption certificate and have that exemption certificate apply to an invoice. He makes beer. He literally said, "It's so good. I'm so thankful that my beer is good, because I really need a beer right now." So that's a perfect example of the business is not making it easy for their customers to buy from them. So we want to consider, when we're selling, that customer experience is key. The customers are burdened by providing paperwork. They don't want to do that. They just want to buy something. Nobody likes delays in orders. Nobody likes a bad experience. And certainly even our internal customer, our credit managers or our frontline people who are collecting these, we don't want to hold them responsible for knowing what these certificates look like, and they don't like incorrect invoices or delays either, or a lot of paperwork. So when we think of customer experience, we want to think of both our internal and our external customers. In addition, we want to think of the impact of where we sell. We need to be able to collect and validate and apply exemption certificates in all areas where we go to business, when we go to market and where we conduct business. So this is an example of We might sell online. We might sell via a marketplace. We might sell over the phone. We might have an e-commerce marketplace. So in each of these places, we want to make it easy for our customers to buy from us. And that is related to exemption certificates, very heavily related to exemption certificates. So many businesses that we talk to are adding a B2B website, or they're adding different channels. They might have multiple websites. They might be adding retail. So we need to make sure that we're making it easy for our customers to buy from us if they want to be tax exempt wherever we go to market. Maybe we're at a trade show. We want to make it easy to collect that certificate at that time. And then lastly, there's audit risk. I don't really like to say risk. I prefer to say, let's just not create any liability, because it's only risky if you did it wrong, right? So it's only risky if you cannot prove you have that certificate. So I like to say, let's just not create any liability. As I said, the money should come from your customer and go straight to the government. It's a pass through. We are a pass through. We don't want any of that money coming out of our pocket because it's not our tax liability. I just think it's funny when people say, well, we didn't owe any money. Well, it's not really your money to owe, it's from your customers. So if you do it right in the beginning, then we shouldn't have that problem. And you probably know that states need revenue, and they're well aware that businesses aren't doing a brilliant job of verifying the exemption certificates and also maintaining them, keeping them set up for renewal. Again, I live in the state of Washington. We don't have state income tax here. So sales tax is a big thing in our state, and it's a big place that our state gets revenue. So our auditors are quick to look at exemption certificates because they know that what most businesses do is they collect something and they file it somewhere, and that's about it. They're not really good at verifying, making sure it's the right certificate for the right reason, and they're definitely not good at maintaining them and proactively renewing them before they expire. And then when you go out into those states on the slides that Chad showed, when you have exposure in multiple states, you don't necessarily know what the rules are and the forms are in different states. You may be familiar with your home state. The Texas one, the resale certificate, fairly basic and it doesn't expire. Okay, that's easy. But when I start selling in multiple states across the central US or across the country, now I've got a whole bunch of different forms I need to be aware of. So we don't want to create any liability by not doing a good job of validating those documents and maintaining them and keeping them set up for renewal. And just a couple of quick numbers, we find that, of course, the industries that get audited frequently, are manufacturers, construction, wholesalers, and retail, because they know that these businesses may have customers that want to be tax exempt and are most likely not doing a good job of managing those certificates. So you can see that the most common mistakes that they find are nexus oversights, as Chad talked about, not being registered in the right state based on all of the new laws, exemption certificate management, and then, of course, misreporting use tax, which if you are a manufacturer, you probably know what that is, and that's can be very challenging because it's a very subjective, and that's a different webinar. But we can talk about that all day, but that is another thing that is difficult, and so it can be error prone. So let's talk a little bit about some best practices. What we recommend and what we've seen. So one of the things I like to talk about, this was actually a slide that I learned my first week at Avalara 10 years ago now, and today it still resonates with me. We, in our businesses, we think that what I call the top of the iceberg is we think that tax calculation equals tax compliance. It's really just the top of the iceberg, and I sometimes call it the sexy part of sales tax because it's what we as consumers see on our receipts. It's what we see as consumers. So, and everyone wants to launch a website and they want to calculate tax properly. But in reality, businesses have all these other responsibilities underneath that iceberg that are related to sales and use tax compliance. Like it or not, these are things your business needs to comply with. Otherwise, as I said, money can come out of your pocket unnecessarily. So there's nexus that we talked about, customer satisfaction, exemption certificates, incoming and outgoing to your vendors, being ready for audits, launching e-commerce and other ways of going to market, filing those sales tax returns accurately and on time. Global tax compliance, you're probably thinking about going out of the country. What are the rules for that? Do I need to calculate taxes and duties if I ship stuff into Canada? When do I have to register? There's use tax we mentioned. Of course, there's just research, looking up the rules that apply in each individual state or country. Do we know how that state treats exempt sales, treats the taxability of the products and services that I sell? When do I need to register? There's just a lot of Googling going on out there and trying to understand what the tax laws are that would affect my business. We're developing a new product. We need to understand how what are the tax liabilities for that. We need to understand margin for our jobs. So with that, Avalara has created a solution that ties together, that covers many of these things together. So it starts with exemption certificate management. If you're in the business where you have tax exempt buyers, you need to have a really good set of those images that are validated and set up for renewal. So we have an exemption certificate management platform. So if you're a current customer of Avalara and you're just using Avatax, that is our middle pillar here on this slide. That is the part that does the tax determination. Notice it doesn't say calculation there, because what we want it to do is we want it to bump up against an exemption certificate. So the paradigm shift for you is you no longer mark your customers tax exempt in your ERP, in your accounting platform. You mark the customer exempt in Avalara, and you let Avalara make that tax determination, because the software is going to verify that software and services are going to verify that certificate as well as set it up for renewal. So let Avalara do its job, get all your certificates up to date, and then the tax determination engine will do its job for you. If it sees a certificate, then it sends back 0 tax to your order. If it doesn't see a valid certificate for that ship to, then it proceeds with the last thing it does, which is calculate tax for every item on that order. And then the little red arrow on the top left that's going from to the right, then all the data flow through to Avalara, and that's the information that we use to complete your sales tax returns. So you tell the software, what state am I in, what state do I have Nexus in, what's the form they want me to file, and what's the frequency they want me to file it. You just tell the software that, and the software takes all of your sales data and puts it right onto those forms for your review. So you have pre-filled out forms. And if you look in the bottom of the middle column, if you connect with us everywhere, remember omni-channel, everywhere that you're making sales, then we have all of that information from everywhere. And there's no more kludging reports, running reports out of different systems and combining them together. It's all going into one master application, and that's what enables us to fill out those forms. You review those forms, approve them, make any changes, fund one account, and then we send those forms out to the government, and we guarantee they'll be filed on time and while taking advantage of the any early filing discounts. So that's the suite that Avalara has created, and in the bottom middle, we have integrations with many platforms, including Acumatica, Sage, Infor, Epicor, QuickBooks, all kinds of e-commerce platforms, Shopify, Magento, you name it, BigCommerce. We have an integration with them. So you want to connect with the software in all of the places where you actually create invoice transactions. And we'll take some questions on that at the end, of course. So I think I'm going to hop over to the demo from here before I get into the services, and we'll talk about the services. So let me share my screen here. All right, I believe you can see my screen.
You're
So
good.
this is the Avalara software. So it is an online, it's SaaS software. So it is an online application. Sorry, whoops, can you still see that? Is that still, nope, sorry, hold on, we'll go back over here. Sorry about that. Okay, so it is an online application. Oh, it's still not showing. One moment, sorry, let me fix this. Okay. Just trying to put it on a different screen, that didn't work so well. Is it showing? There we go. Okay, just taking a minute. Okay, so it's an online application, and it has the 3 pillars that we just talked about in the system. So the first one that I'm on here is the exemption certificates. This is the area where you would upload your customers and their ship to states. So this number over here in my little example is in my demo system here, we expect to have 3,200 certificates. That's all of my customers that want to be tax exempt times all of their ship to states. So if Chad is having me send goods to 5 different states, that's 5 documents that I need to have from him. So that is my current active customers times ship to states. So what I have here is I have verified and validated an actual image of a document for 1,404 of this this list. So I have a partially complete portfolio of these documents. So when we onboard you, we want to take either the certificates that you have and validate them and get them into the system, or you can keep all that paper and we'll run a campaign using a little email tool right over here, this little request certificates from customers. We're going to, it has a built-in email tool, and we will send out a request to those customers and on your behalf and ask them to complete an exemption certificate for each state that they have ship tos in. And so that's where we are right now. In my sample here, we have validated 1,400 of those, but we still need 1,796 more of those guys in order to complete my chart here. So I want to have a fully or almost fully completed chart that will show that I have a valid certificate on file for every customer everywhere I know that they have ship to locations. So it's a project to move from your current status to a system like this. But then once you do that, everything is automatically set up for renewal. So we will automatically send a reminder out to customers that are in, say, Florida, Arizona, Alabama, Illinois, where those certificates actually expire. And we're going to remind them to send a new certificate in before the other one expires. Because if you end up with an expired certificate, like in this section, when an invoice comes over from your ERP or your e-commerce shopping cart, Avalara is going to charge tax on that order because your certificate is no longer valid. Or if they never responded, here, if we have missing certificates, maybe Chad only sent me his California one, but he never sent me his Texas one. If he has something going to Texas, Avalara is going to charge him tax because you aren't compliant. He's not compliant. He hasn't given you his Texas exemption certificate. So it's going to make you compliant in that way. And we want to make it really easy for him to do that. So I'm going to pause sharing for a second and show you what that experience would look like for Chad if we sent him an email and asked him to send us an exemption certificate. So if you haven't seen our collection portal, it is called Cert Express. Let's see if this will show on the screen. All right, so this is a sample email. It should be popping up here in a minute. This is a sample email that we might send a customer on your behalf. So you can send these out of your system, but we do definitely recommend that when you're first working with us that you leverage Avalara's managed services, which I'll get back to right after the demo, because we know what we're looking at. We know what the forms should look like. We can verify all the data on it. We're super fast. We understand how to use the software. So we can get these all collected and get that chart green for you fairly quickly. So this is a sample email. It's going to have your logo in it here. It has some standard content. You can customize a bit of this content. You can also specify what state you want to collect a certificate for. But the customer can either just reply to this email with their certificate or certificates, and those would go right into the platform. Or they can also click this little link here. And this is the collection engine for Avalara, for our system that actually collects those documents. Hold on, I got to find you again. That collects those certificates. I have to stop sharing. I have to do my screen instead of my document. Let's share that again. we
I
go
was
with
going to
that.
jump in real quick as you're doing that. A lot
Yeah,
of times
go
where I
ahead.
see clients really utilizing these services is, for example, if they weren't aware, that tax exempt sales did contribute to economic nexus. And before, let's say, getting registered in the state, let's say they have triggered nexus, they weren't aware of that, but they want to then decide that they want to go ahead and register. A lot of times clients use this service because they want to get level set. So either their exemption certificate process has been like a wild, wild west. They may have some in folders, they may have some lying around. They're not really sure even if they have valid ones anymore. So a lot of times clients will use this service to get level set. And then once they get level set in that area, that's when they will register in those states. Because if they do register a lot of times, and let's say, an auditor or, obviously when you register, you've made the state aware we are doing business here. They may knock on your door and say, okay, then why haven't you been collecting tax revenue at this, before now? Why have you been collecting tax, or why haven't you registered? And that's where clients really utilize this to make sure that they have all those certificates in place. Then they register to protect themselves. And it saves them.
Exactly. And that minimizes, that's correct. It minimizes any of that back due liability. So you're right. A lot of times when people are doing registrations or voluntary disclosure, then we'll go back and collect all those certificates so that they can understand what they really owe if they didn't pay on taxable sales, but they shouldn't have to pay on those non-taxable sales. And now they have proof that they're not taxable. So yeah, really great point. Thanks for bringing that up, Chad. So this is what our collection portal looks like, and it is called Cert Express. So this is now what the customer experiences. So if Chad is coming to buy something from me, he will be directed to this portal, and he can give us an exemption certificate for any state that we specified or any state that he wants to be tax exempt in. So let's just say he wants to be tax exempt in the state of Illinois, which is a good example, and he's a reseller. He simply picks his state, picks his reason, or we preloaded it for him, depending on how much information we have. And then it shows him the actual certificate that Illinois Department of Revenue accepts for resale. But you can see all these blank fields. There's a lot of ink that has to be on this one. What's the property he's buying? Who is he? Is it a blanket? Is it one time? He has to sign it and date it. So there's some stuff he has to do here. So if he has it already filled out, you can give him the option of just importing that. And again, remember I said he can also reply to that email. He can also just send it to you and you can upload it. Doesn't really matter how it gets into the system. The point is it gets into the system. And here, if he doesn't want to import it, he can fill it out digitally. So we've taken those fields and we've just created digital fields. So we can put in his account number, what is he buying, what percentage of the purchases are for resale, whatever he needs to fill out here. And then he hits next and he puts his title and he simply signs it online. And that goes immediately into our platform. Move this guy out of the way. That goes immediately into your subscription here as an incoming certificate to review. So you can see someone had submitted a certificate here. Let's see if there's a real one. Yeah, so here's a Streamline sales tax certificate that one of my colleagues brought into our demo system here. So this is a Streamline sales tax, or a multi-state form. So they've obviously they put it here as their tax ID, North Carolina. Well, that's not a good tax ID. So this would be an invalid certificate. We review everything on here and make sure that it's completely filled out. And we add that data over here. So this one has some misinformation on it. So we would save that as an invalid document. If it were accurate and there was a tax ID number here where it says North Carolina, we would capture that tax ID and we would verify that tax ID number, or the format or the actual number with the state, depending on what the state allows. So we're going to make sure on your behalf that these forms will hold up an audit. And in 20 years, we've never been challenged in an audit. So you're guaranteed that these certificates are going to be valid and on file and set up for renewal. So we also know the expiration date. This one, the Georgia certificate technically doesn't expire. So this one allows you to enter an expiration date, maybe every 5 years if you want, or leave it as not expiring. So it's going to be a very state-specific rule. If I added another state over here, it may have an expiration date that has to be applied, because we would duplicate this form for the number of states noted on it. So we will take care of all those things for you and make sure that they're all set up for renewal. So if I go back to my overview screen here, we can see that we would have added a valid certificate or an invalid certificate over here to this wheel, and it knows when they expire. So our team, or there are triggers in the system that you can send automatic reminders out to your customers. It's easier to have us do it because then we'll also validate that document when it comes back in. Sure, you can send a trigger, but who's validating when it comes back in? So you want to make sure that those documents are valid. So the services on my next couple of slides are to help you with that. So to help you onboard, take you from your current state into a future state of a valid portfolio of these documents. And then we also offer them on an ongoing basis. And that means we will maintain those renewals. We will also validate all new certificates that come in over time as you add customers and as your customers add ship to states. And so real quickly, before I go off the demo and we'll wrap up here, you can also see this section here for view all vendors. So this section here means you can not only collect certificates like we just talked about, but if you're a distributor and you have a lot of vendors that you work with, this gives you a place to actually create and send your own resale certificates for all states and provide them out to your customers. So, your vendors, pardon me, you can provide those to your vendors. So when you collect that W-9, you can use our W-9 platform for that. That's another webinar. And you can also create and send your exemption certificate at the same time, right when you set them up, and then job done. You don't have to wait for them to either bill you with tax or ask you sometime later for a certificate. Just do it and provide it to them, and also know when that expires. So with that, I shall stop sharing, Chad, and we can go back to our slides here, which I think you should be able to see the slide. So this is just a review of the services that I just talked about. That's the one-time, which is kind of the onboarding process, and then the recurring managed services, which is where we do the maintenance for you for new and added certificates. So summarizing, why do we want to automate tax compliance? We want to get it accurate. We don't want to owe the government any more money than we need to. We also want that money to come from our customer and go to the government. We don't want any of it to come out of our pocket in the middle that doesn't have to. We want to create efficiencies in our business. We've got all those channels that we're going to market in now. We want to create customer satisfaction. Every website I go and look at has something about we pride ourselves on customer satisfaction. Don't forget that billing is also part of customer satisfaction, accurate billing, and that's related to an accurate and efficient exemption certificate validation process. Risk, remember, I don't like the word risk. We don't want to create any risk. So we want to minimize anything coming out of your pocket and make sure that you're just applying, you're maintaining, and what is the word I want? You are keeping track of all the rules in all the states and doing it how they require you to. So we're not creating any risk. Then, of course, we need to set ourselves up for growth. Always. That's what we're always trying to do. So with that, I'm going to send this back over to Chad to talk a little bit about the savings that businesses get and a little bit about how to work with Avalara.
Yes, thank you, Maria. So in this scenario, as you can see, before the pre-scenario, the current situation in this case was, like I said earlier, a lot of times I find Wild West when it comes to, collecting and keeping up to speed, up to date and non-expired, tax exempt forms. So, a lot of times it's typically a manual process. There's different people in the company doing it. Sometimes it's a salesperson. Sometimes it's, an accountant. It's kind of across the board. But the result of how much, once they did install exemption, our ECM, exemption certificate management module, or cert capture, as we've also talked about today, afterwards, the software collects it, it maintains it. The system is also intelligent enough to, like Maria said, monitor it and actually be proactive to go collect, say, a new exemption certificate when it does expire. And there's some states like Florida where they expire every year. So the system is intelligent enough. So in this case, the result of installing exemption certificate management saved the staff 30 minutes per exemption because they didn't have to go back and make sure it's the correct form. It is always the correct form. And as Maria showed you, it's very easy for the customer to go in and actually send them and walks them through exactly to create the form, the form that is the right form, not just a random form out there. From a financial perspective, over a 3-year period, it saved them over close to $97,000. So, for the quote there, using his ECM tool has been an amazing transition for us. Zip out of files. On the query, we get the auditor, so it's very fast, and we can go through them electronically, check them, and then send them off. So it completely optimized their entire process, and at the same time made them compliant, which at the end of the day was their goal. So kind of some important questions to kind of ask yourself when you kind of take a step back and after the conversation today. How many states are you or do you need to register from us to be sales tax compliant? What percentage of your customers or businesses are exempt versus non-exempt? How do you plan to collect, update those documents? What does that customer experience really look like? Like Maria said earlier, you going back and, do you spend a lot of times going back and forth because you tax someone like, oh no, actually we're not taxable. And then you're having to go back and then rebill and then go through the process of then collecting the correct form. So that's why a lot of times it does save 30 minutes per certificate. Is this current process scalable? A lot of clients I work with, the ones that really find themselves in difficult situations, they are growing rapidly and they're growing so fast. They continue to go into different states, either through organic growth or through acquisitions. They don't know what they don't know. And if it's a manual process in place, this keeps on adding more work to typically departments who are already stressed and already have some constraints when it comes down to bandwidth. Do you have or are you planning to create or improve an online B2B experience? I see that a lot of times as well. What is the quality of the documents you have now? Are they valid? Are they the correct documents? Because you don't want to have that risk, and any type of auditor comes in, they're going to require that you do have that correct documentation. Can you afford delay orders or lose business? And do you have a tax compliance expertise to ensure what is collected is accurate and valid? And that's exactly what our system does provide, the value it does provide. Okay, I think we already did that right there, did we not?
Yeah, I was a little early on the demo.
So just in a nutshell, kind of like what we were talking about all today over the past 45 minutes or so. Why exemption certificate management, ECM, it's end-to-end automation, as you can see. From a compliance standpoint, it reduces your risk. It simplifies all the workflow flows and automates collection, validation, and then also, as you saw, integrates directly into Acumatica. Acumatica actually built that integration and it continued to evolve it. Because this time last year, actually, we did not have that integration with our ECM product, and Acumatica built that functionality. So at the end of the day, it reduces risk. It will drive efficiency, as we talked about, and also it will improve customer satisfaction. It's a much better customer experience for sure. So how do we work together? And this is a service that I provide a lot of times with my clients, not just me, but I would say organizationally. A lot of times, if you do have some concerns, you may have triggered Nexus. We're aware of maybe all the laws. You may have triggered Nexus across the country. We do offer, in this case, a free risk assessment. It's typically $4,500, and basically what it does is it's 2 pieces of data that we need that is part of this exercise. Basically, the number of transactions and the amount of revenue or amount of sales in each state that can easily be pulled out of Acumatica or other type of billing systems you may have. So to do this, you have a QR code right there. You can also even email your salesperson directly or myself. But this will give you a great snapshot of exactly. It will show exactly. Okay, you are risk here. We have identified some risk here. Now, what steps do you want to take if you do want to be compliant? And that's what the goal of this exercise is, and it's been very valuable to a lot of clients. I've had clients who trigger Nexus across 40 states and had no clue before this, and immediately went out, collected all their exemption certificates, then they registered, and then at the end of the day, they did that without spending a lot of time because we were doing it on their behalf. So that's the value of this risk assessment right there. And there's all of our information. So you can either scan the QR code, schedule a meeting with myself, or you can contact me at the email address below. Either one would be fine. Okay, now for questions.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, that was great. Great presentation, you two. As always, very insightful. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put those in the Q&A now. I know we have a couple that were submitted while you guys were presenting, so we'll go ahead and roll into those while we're waiting for everybody to submit theirs. Maybe. First question: if I have exceeded a threshold in a state and don't know if I'm registered or where I'm collecting, what are my potential risks?
You want me to take that one, Chad?
Sure, you can take that one, Maria. Doesn't
You're
matter.
being quiet. Yeah, doesn't matter to me. Yeah, so we kind of covered this, but really, as I said, if you don't register, if you've exceeded a threshold and you don't register, then you are going to owe any tax that you didn't collect from essentially the time that you crossed nexus in that state or established nexus in that state. So for you, it would be, when did we establish a presence? When did we pass that 100,000 mark? So you can owe that money out of your pocket. So what Chad was talking about is if you have a lot of exempt sales, you might want to collect those exemption certificates quickly, because that could minimize any back due liability that you owe to that state before you go ahead and get registered. So that offer that we have is a great, I highly recommend it. If you've not done a nexus analysis for your business in the past year or more, do it again. You never know where your business is going. It's very hard to manage manually. It's time consuming, and there are nuances for in each state, different rules, as we showed you on the slides. So do the nexus analysis. It will give you a cursory look at where you might have triggered nexus, and then we can discuss that and talk about potential next steps if needed. So don't want to owe any money out of your pocket. Don't want to pay Chad's tax bill for him.
Perfect. Moving to the next question. Do I need to change anything in my ERP to use Avalara?
I can take this one, Maria. No, you do not. We have a pre-built connector. So Avalara has a pre-built connector to connect directly into Acumatica. And you can work directly in the Acumatica or ECM, either one. But typically with this, with this new connector and the new integration, you can work all within Acumatica. It has all the functionality it does, even if it wasn't connected. And there's actually nothing to change whatsoever. It's a very simple connector. If you go through any type of upgrades in the future, if you are using Acumatica, there's no problems there either. There's no configuration that needs to be done. It's a very, very easy connection to establish.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that is you don't change anything in the ERP, but when it comes to exempt customers, remember my chart, we're gonna depend on Avalara to make that decision on exempt or not at the time of invoice. So one thing you do differently, it's not changing anything, but one thing you do differently operationally is you mark all of your customers taxable in your ERP. There you just say they're all taxable, and you let Avalara, taxable in air quotes, right? And you let Avalara make that tax decision for you, that tax determination at the time of invoice. So sometimes that's a tough paradigm shift for people, but wait, I can't see it. But with the Acumatica connector, you can actually see into our system, and you can see the status of the certificate. You can see what certificates you have on file, and you can actually request a certificate right from your Acumatica customer record. So it's hard, I know, but it works. That's how we have, we manage over 100,000, a million exemption certificates for our customers. So it works.
Awesome. Going to the next question. What would you recommend if my company exceeds most of the state's economic nexus thresholds, but has not registered anywhere yet, just registered in their home state? Do they need to worry about their historical liability?
Yes, and Maria, jump in here whenever you want to. But yes, I would definitely recommend, and that's why we're offering this free risk assessment. Honestly, is yes, you would need to potentially worry about historical liability. But if say for example, we go through the risk assessment together, identify a handful of states or whatever the states, even if it's one, right? You still want to mitigate the risk to be compliant. So yes, you definitely would want to.
You have to consider it. Yeah, you definitely have to consider it. And each state has different laws related to it.
Perfect. I have a couple more, but doesn't mean that has to be the last of it. Please keep submitting the Q&As. They're wonderful questions. There are some states that include an expiration date on their certificates. Do we need to make sure that we have not expired certificates from customers for those states, or is it okay if we get a new one every few years?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's a great question because I think a lot of people just think, oh, we'll just request one every few years. So as I mentioned earlier, the software will tell you whether or not that state has a law for expiration. Sometimes it's very obvious, it's right on the form, like on the Florida one. Sometimes it's not. Illinois resale and manufacturing, nowhere on the form do they tell you where those things expire. You have to go surf around on the DOR website. So if you're not using any solution, you have to know the laws by state and keep those up to date, because if it expires unknowingly, you could owe that tax out of your pocket. So what the software does is actually allow you to know what the state's rules are and set each of the certificates up for renewal when applicable. Now, if it's a state like Texas that I mentioned, where that resale certificate actually doesn't expire, nor do California resale certificates, with the software, instead of trying to remember, you also could create a custom rule and say, hey, I want to get all new certificates from my Texas customers once every 5 years. I know they technically don't expire, but if I want to create a business rule to do that, I can. So the software gives you a place to manage that, to know what the law is and create any business rules around those laws should you choose to. It makes it a lot easier than just trying to guess. And most people don't get around to it. I've found, Chad, you probably have too, people have very good intentions of trying to keep these up to date, but it falls by the wayside because it just doesn't seem like a super important task to do during all the rest of our year-end things. Somebody quits, or, a lot of people just don't take the time. They do have good intentions, but generally don't take the time to go back and make sure that they're updated. They collect one and kind of keep that one forever. Anything else, Marika?
I think we have one more question, and then we'll wrap it up. Last question. What if each location is under different businesses/franchises? Should I get a different exempt form?
Each location of yours, so if it's your location, your locations, and they are different business entities, then yes, you would need to collect a separate exemption certificate from, say, Chad, because each of those are different sales tax filing entities. Each of those entities could get audited separately, and exemption certificates, as you saw in the sample that I showed you, you have to say, what am I buying and what is my intent with that product on many certificates, and that could be very different from business to business that you're buying from. So yes, if they're different sales tax filing entities, then you would need a second exemption certificate or a certificate for each of the entities that your customers purchase from.
Awesome. I think that was the last of them. All right. Well, thank you so much, Avalara team. We really appreciate your time, and thank you to everyone that joined us today. If anybody is to have any other questions in the future, please feel free to reach out to Chad or Maria anytime, or you can reach out to the Action team at info@action.com. Thank you, Avalara team.
Thanks, Marika.
Thank you.